Very good morning and welcome to Morning Express. It is the 9th of July 2020. The time is 7 o'clock local time. Always great to have you right here on the show Morning Express. And well, we are up and ready to give you information and update you on what's happening. Of course, as usual, we're going to start with looking at what's making headlines on the dailies right here on Morning Express. But we have a whole lot lined up for you. And Tricks, we have Governor coming into studio not too long from now.
Right. Today we're going to be focusing squarely on county preparedness, and we will have Governor Mohamed, who is also the Council of Governors Health Committee chairperson, who's going to help us just delve into the preparedness of various counties. We're going to look into testing capacity, the beds that we've been hearing about, the 300-bed capacity, as well as some controversies surrounding the preparation, the budgets that are allocated to COVID-19 and its curbing its spread at the local level. So stay tuned for that and much more here on this show.
Also, mental health is going to be on focus today as we look at a report that was released by the task force given the responsibility of ensuring that they advise government on what needs to be done. So we'd like to just look at where we are, especially as a nation, when it comes to mental health. Remember, we've had quite a number of issues with with mental health cases, with rape, with teenage pregnancy, and would just like to find out from psychologists and psychiatrists where we are in regards to mental health right here as a country. But first, before we get into all that, we're going to be looking at what's making headlines on the dailies. And joining me to do that, we're joined by Arnold Maliba, who is a public policy analyst. Good morning, and thank you for joining us, Arnold.
Good morning.
All right, and we'll go straight into what's making headlines on the dailies this morning, and we start off as usual with the Standard, where the headline is Pay, Why Teachers Are Lucky. And this is to do with, of course, the extension, or rather, the cancellation of exams that was announced by the CS for Education, that's Professor Magoha. And as a result, teachers were a little bit on edge, wondering as to whether between now and next year, given that there's going to be no exams and technically no school happening, particularly in public schools, whether their salaries are going to be remitted, or does that mean that they will not be paid? But according to this particular article, it looks like teachers will still be smiling on their way to the bank, despite the fact that exams have been cancellation. Good news, I guess, for teachers, Arnold, and looking at the fact that it's not really their fault that they're not going to school.
Well, a little bit, the article for me sounds funny because teachers are permanent and pensionable employees of for schools, and they just do not only do teaching as in going before students. There's the preparation of teaching schemes. There's so much of preparatory work that actually goes into teaching, away from just showing up in class and working out, or rather speaking to students. But there's so much work that they do. That is why even during holidays, the teachers are still paid.
Right.
But then for me, there's something to this that we really need to talk about, and that is the private schools.
Right.
For the longest time, teachers in private schools have actually looked away from unions, for example, NAT, COPET and the others. And I think this particular pandemic then speaks to the need of them actually being unionizable and actually ensuring that their welfare is taken care of. Now, unlike their peers who are now in government, you realize that the Employment Act actually covers them very well. But we see teachers in private schools who immediately it was impossible. Actually, in the last 2-3 months, so many of them have been laid off. There are no salaries coming through. That means that now they actually are forming one of the serious part of professionals who are actually getting jobless.
Unemployed.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so far it's just been not possible for them to join unions, and this possibly has been as a result from their employers. Is there a way around that, do you think?
Well, the Employment Act somehow is that particular, I call it a landmine when it comes to employers, for the simple reason that if you do not know how to navigate around that law, and there's a regime of about 4 laws that govern how we employ people in this country. But somehow teachers in private sector, of course, it is said that it pays, a good number of them actually are well paid, though a number of private schools are not necessarily doing well, and they're not so up high there. But the aspect about how we approach labor in this country, or rather in this particular time, is actually two-way. There is the HR way, and then there is the place of the union, where the union then looks at the interests of, or rather the labor unions look at the interests of employees, and the HR end of it take care of the employers. But somehow for teachers in the private sector, it has not been very attractive, because somehow the HR within that particular end somehow came and took over the union's part, because they're paid well, your issues are taken care of well. And that then now leaves them exposed in moments like this. Because literally, even the business model and things around that for private schools has not really been what you would call something that is sustainable in such like cases, because we never foresaw such like moments.
Absolutely. And well, it's a wake-up call for private schools and private school teachers, of course, to come together. But again, looking at it from the perspective of education being, a general right for every Kenyan, private schools are actually a formation of failure of public schools, so to speak. Because if public schools worked properly and functioned efficiently, then there really would be no need for private schools. Don't you think it's about time we also looked at that, so that not to destroy the private schools, but to strengthen the public schools, so that we have a balanced way of having education distributed to our children?
That is one way of looking at it. But I think in an open market like ours, it's very hard to say that, or rather it's not correct to say that public schools are a manifestation of a failure by government or the education system not to cater for everybody else. Because the population growth has actually been very fast. Almost in every sector we are trying to catch up. But be that as it may, you realize that it's so good to speak about private schools when we're talking about the primary education or basic education at the primary level. But immediately it gets to secondary level, everyone else wants to go to a public school. Literally the schools everyone wants to go to are schools that are run by government when it comes to secondary schools. So there's so much noise and so much prestige about going to pursuing, or rather taking on private education, or rather private schools offering education at primary school. But once it gets to secondary school, everybody wants to go to Alliance, everybody wants to go to Pangani Girls, everyone wants to go to Serehe, and then Nairobi schools of this world. So there's also something about that. Why has the private sector not been able to provide good schools when it comes to the secondary schools? And even colleges, though institutions like Mount Kenya and others have actually come in and filled that gap. So there's a good competition. You realize that sometimes even their medical school, in some parameters, will actually beat up the oldest of medical school in this country, which is the University of Nairobi School of Medicine. Yeah.
All right, and while we're still on schools and matter schools, the Daily Nation has a different headline: schools to refund fees paid in advance. And of course, another worry that parents had was the fact that with now cancellation of exams and the fact that the whole stream is going to repeat next year come January, was the parents who possibly had paid for second term in advance, because there has been no second term throughout. So according to this particular article, the CS has given direction and said that school fees will be refunded to parents or will be carried forward to next year, which again, of course, would be good news for parents, given that these are very hard times, and there was that question lingering as to whether that money will just be lost by virtue of the fact that they've paid for it, but students have not reported to school.
Well, I think this particular matter is not being handled with some thinking put to it, for the simple reason that schools have got bills that actually, and overheads that run beyond the students being in class. Some schools have got leases, they have got loans, they have got teachers to pay, they have got staff to actually take care of, like we've got guys doing security. So, and also there's not so much data around this. So we don't know how the number of people who had already paid, because there's an assumption that it's a big thing. And of course, it has made it to the headlines, but there's no data to actually tell us how many parents had actually paid in advance, had paid in advance, and the dynamics that then goes into how you run a school. There's still going to be electricity bills, the water bills, of course, not to the same level where they would be when the schools are operating normally, but then issues around existing loans, security, for example, and such. So,
but it becomes tricky because then if I have paid for school fees, yet my child has not gone to school, I have fed them, for instance, even in a case of boarding school, I have, kept them, I have given them food and all that, whereas I had already taken that money out to assume that the school was going to take care of that. Then it becomes a little bit tricky to know how to handle that because, again, we have parents who've probably lost their jobs.
That is true, but I'm saying it's actually a very difficult thing, and I do not think that there is one way to look at it.
To solve it.
Yeah, you cannot look at it one way and say, because schools are closing. They have been paying salaries, for example, in the last 3 months when students weren't there, and they were still hoping that they will open up. Now we've pushed it to next year. So that money probably has been expended. And some schools actually went out and took facilities in banks to actually just ensure that they sustain their workforce and honor their obligations when it comes to employment, the contracts and such. So I know it's going to be very hard, both for school owners, especially for private school owners, and for parents who already have also paid and they have not seen the value for their money. So I think the most logical way would be that we try and push it to next year and balance out.
And balance it out.
Yeah, otherwise saying that you're going to refund that money, I find it a little bit difficult for so many people.
Absolutely. And well, I guess it will be handled on a case-to-case basis. But there you go. The headline there is schools to refund fees paid in advance. Let's look at other stories in the Standard. On page 2, we have an interesting article there. Amina to battle 6 in the race for top WTO post. This is the second stab she's having at this. And the first time, remember, was in 2013 when she was running for this post. And Kenya has given her name and forwarded her name as one of the contestants. And we wish her all the best. This will be the Sports CS second stab at the post, having lost out in 2013. That's on page 2 of the Standard. Your thoughts on this and maybe what this means for Kenya should we get the post?
Even before we talk about what this really means to Kenya, I'm also looking at this, flipping the story and thinking, who really wants to get rid of Amina? Because we tried at the AU to put her out there. Now, either she's so good or currently she's not delivering as somebody would want. So, but then she's that particular asset you do not want to lay to waste. Otherwise, we wanted to send her to the AU. Now we are putting her out to the World Trade Organization. Not necessarily because she's the best we have, but I'm actually feeling, is it a way of us probably trying to ensure she's not around the work she's doing at the moment? I don't know. But
do you feel that maybe she hasn't performed well as in her role as her current role?
Well, her current role, there is not so much difference between her and the chaser. As in, there's not so much to write home about what she has done there. I feel that while she was at Foreign Affairs, she did well. There's no dispute about that. But the Ministry of Sports, there's not so much to write home about her. And I would actually, personally, there's a personal opinion that probably that is the reason why somebody really wants to pack her, but because of the history of attachment and the work she's done in the past, it becomes difficult to just send her home.
Well, I would imagine that given that she has a lot of experience, especially with matters foreign affairs, this might be a more suited position for her and possibly would be able to do well. But we wish her all the best and let's wait and see how that is going to go. We have a number of countries, 6 other candidates are also, vying for the same position, and we'll wait and see how that is going to pan out. But also on page 3 of the Standard, this was on social media on several platforms. And this was the CS for IT, that is Mushero, who made a video call to the president yesterday. And this was after the launch of the Google Loon. This is mainly telecommunication and Google partnering with the government to ensure that there is connectivity even in remote areas. There are obviously, positive angles to this, and the fact that one of the things that, they highlighted was the youth in that particular area, which has been cut out from communication because there was no network, would be able to possibly use now the communication possibility to market some of the things that they have. For instance, honey and goats that seem to be very many in that area.
I think that's a good thing to actually ensure that there's an extra layer of connectivity that goes into areas that were struggling with getting the standard network. But I do not think that we had to wait for Google to come in and do this partnership at this particular time. I saw, of course, the launch was, or rather the initiation as done yesterday, was a bit flashy with the president calling in and just exciting a whole village. It's good, yes, but is it true that lack of connectivity has actually hindered market, for example, of honey and goats? The existing traditional ways of actually getting the products from that end, has it failed? It's not also true to say that. It's a good thing. I also hope that as we move now to virtual meetings, so everyone is actually either on Zoom, you're on Teams. We're also hoping that that particular end will help a few of them. But from the numbers we have, especially from government itself, I think there might not be so much in the short run
of a change, especially if we do not sort out the infrastructure, because it is one thing to market your honey and your goats online and somebody wants to buy them, but how to get them to them might be a challenge.
But even with connectivity is one thing. They are not offering gadgets because you have brought the connection, yes, but is everybody with a gadget that can actually utilize?
To connect?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, and well, it's an interesting article there and, to read, but I guess there's a lot of good things that can come out of it, but whether it's been thought through end to end remains a question that we shall wait to see how that pans out. On page 4, Mount Kenya bigwigs to support Kimunya after private lunch, and this is a lunch that apparently took place yesterday, and not much details of what the lunch was about. That's on page 4 of the Standard, but 9 political bigwigs from Central Kenya region staged a political lunch meeting which the leaders were tight-lipped about. They said purely it was there to congratulate Kimunya on his new ascension as now the majority leader in the National Assembly, but undertones, of course, of political pundits wanting to say that there could be some support. Maybe it was them meeting up to garner their support for Kimunya. Your thoughts on this, whether there's anything to read into it, or is it purely an innocent lunch just to congratulate a fellow?
Sometimes I find it being very difficult for individuals who come from Central Kenya and Western. Because if you meet as people from Central Kenya, it makes serious news. Even when you are meeting for private lunch, as it is reported in this particular case. And for people in Western, of course, when they meet, there's always the issue about Luhya unity. So you look at this and you are like, can't two leaders just meet coming from a region with shared geography, shared interest, and shared people, come up together and, of course, work out probably a few issues, iron out issues that are actually important? I saw a tweet alluded to the vice chair, the Jubilee vice chair. I do not know whether that is his account, but if it's true, then you also realize that even as a region, they are struggling with so many things, because the news that came out of it, I saw Senator Kangata saying that there's only one kingpin, which means he felt like he had been excluded, and I don't know why he wasn't part and parcel of the meeting. That also speaks to so much. So
speaks volumes.
Yeah, Kangata is talking about one kingpin, and a post alluded to Morade is also speaking of the same, that there's only one kingpin and people should stop meeting. You wonder exactly where they are going. And at some point I saw there's also a governor who was actually left out.
Right.
The Murang'a governor, Mwangi Wairia. And in his stead, Peter Kenneth
was present.
was present. So that also looks, there's mischief to it. But where there is smoke, there's always fire.
There's always fire.
Definitely,
especially with Kenyan politicians, where there is smoke, there is definitely something to look into. The only thing is that now we may not be able to speculate what the lunch was all about. But of course, reading through the lines, then we can see, based on those who are in attendance and those who possibly skipped the meeting or were not invited, then one cannot help but imagine that there might be some undertones that might be coming out of that meeting.
Yeah, definitely. I think the meeting probably wasn't sanctioned by the president.
All right. Yeah. Let's look at other stories still on the Standard, page 10. Please give us any job teachers plead. And there's a picture there which I think speaks volumes. That's on page 10 of the Standard, of a teacher who has now turned to beauty therapy and is, I think, either doing makeup or tweezing or whatever it is that they're doing. But maybe just speaking to the creativity that has to be born out of the situation that we're in regards to jobs. This one is specifically speaking about teachers, but maybe your thoughts, Arnold, on the youth and how we need to think in terms of thinking out of the box, because job opportunities are probably going to become less, and the government may not even have the capacity to absorb those who already have been fired.
This story speaks to my reaction to when the president actually said that he was opening up the economy. Simply lifting cessation of movement does not necessarily mean, or rather it's not equal to opening up the economy. It will take a bit of time before probably the economy picks up. There are jobs that will actually never be recovered. And you speak about creativity and probably to the youth. I think it cuts across that livelihoods. And that is where the argument comes in when we speak about the virus. There are other challenges or rather some other diseases that take much more people. If we were to extrapolate the data that currently we have of the percentage of the mortality rate from COVID, you realize that malaria is up there. Cancer is way up there. If you are to do that mathematics very well, you will realize that COVID, the percentage of people we are losing is not at the same level with already existing diseases, challenges like malaria and cancer, among others. So one thing speaks to our safety nets. We have not taken care of that last item in Article 43 of the Constitution, and talk about the socioeconomic empowerment. And the last item in that particular act, or rather particular article, speaks of safety net, social security and social safety nets to individuals. You realize that so many of us can become vulnerable very easily. You do not need even to get an accident. Just a virus needs to show up and all of us are vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So the window that was actually provided by opening up the economy for so many people was a breather for people to actually go up country and look for probably get some rest even as we think about the way forward. We are talking about teachers, but what about the others? Guys in media losing jobs, factories are closing down, so many in the hotel industry. Those were the people who are within hospitality industry were hit hardest.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are not even talking about them. And as a country, we've really been largely a service economy. We moved away from being a manufacturing economy sometimes back, I think, 2 decades ago. So I do not know how we will actually go about this, but it's a policy dilemma, especially for the president.
For the president. Yeah. All right. And talking about opening up the economy and, you know, having the country now able to, people to move from one county to another, the last article maybe we'll look at on page 11, no quarantine, distancing on flights in new guidelines. We do know that now matatus are going to be flying. However, they must have a compliance certificate before they do that, and it's expected to be distributed and given out from today. But also in regards to opening up international flights, which is supposed to happen from the 1st of August, we now have, you know, according to the CS for transport, saying that even, you know, flights may not necessarily have to adjust their capacity too much, because again they would be operating at a loss. So this leaves us wondering whether we are going to find ourselves right where we started from.
Well, the guidelines as given, I think we are doing a lot of policy by assumption, policy by segregation, because we have exempted flights from leaving the aisle seat empty. But matatus are expected, because apparently flights will operate at a loss. What we forget is that a majority of people, travelers, are using road. But for roads, we actually have put in, and we even do not think about it, that transport has actually become 3 times expensive, sometimes 4-fold, because of actually ensuring that seats and the protocols are adhered to. So there is a way there's a lot of experimentalism in this, but no one really has gotten this thing right anywhere. All of us are trying to work out with a new challenge. We are walking and chewing gum at the same time, or rather taking the stairs and chewing gum at the same time. I don't know whether we are going the Tanzanian way, because we are opening up and telling guys you can come up, you can come in, but it's not necessary so long as you have got
that certificate.
But you know, a COVID test is just useless an hour after you've taken it, because after you have the results, you can actually get it after you have tested. So it really doesn't mean so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Arnold, we'll have to wind up right there because of time, but do get yourself a copy of the Standard and see what is making headlines. So we're going to take a short break. It's now 25 minutes after 7. A quick reminder of that question that we have this morning. How prepared is your county to handle COVID-19 pandemic? How prepared is your county to handle the COVID-19 pandemic is the question that we are